Chapter 2903, Fame shakes God's domain. Dark Knight Empire, Winter Night Border Fortress. With the opening of the Second War of Worlds, the Outer Worlds NPC army had appeared at the borders of many of the eastern continent's kingdoms and empires. Although no full-blown battles had taken place yet, many skirmishes had occurred already. Guild Leader Lu, I'm afraid things will be troublesome this time. The Outer Worlds NPC army is much larger than we anticipated. Although the Outer World player army we have to deal with is much smaller than those at the other empires, we'll still face a tough fight, even if we work together with the Empire's army. Hidden Cloud, the fifth-floor master of the Super Guild 9 Heavens Pavilion, said with a frown as he read the latest report on the Outer World's NPC army. If we can't even hold our side, there's no need to mention pushing back the Outer World's NPC army and taking Zero Wing's 2 cities in the Orc Empire. During the First War of Worlds, both sides had gathered all their forces at one location for a decisive battle. However, the Outer Worlds NPC army had acted differently this time, splitting into several dozen smaller groups and invading multiple kingdoms and empires simultaneously. Many of their targets were even empires holding strategic locations on the eastern continent. The forces the Outer World NPCs had invested into this second war were on a whole other level compared to before. Thus, many of the eastern continent's kingdoms and empires had no choice but to focus on defending their own territory. In this situation, even if the Twin Towers Kingdom and Starmoon Kingdom fell, Starlink and its several allied superpowers wouldn't be able to get the eastern continent's various kingdoms and empires to retake Starmoon Kingdom. And if Starmoon Kingdom remained in the Outer World NPC's hands, taking Zero Wing's lost ancient Rock City and Silverwing City would also be impossible. You can rest assured, Brother Cloud. According to the information I got, the several kingdoms neighboring the Dark Knight Empire that aren't under attack are already mobilizing their troops to the Dark Knight Empire, Lu Tiandi said, assuaging Hidden Cloud's worries. Once these kingdoms' armies arrive, combined with the players we have here, defending against the Outer World's NPC army shouldn't be difficult. As for Zero Wing's 2 guild cities, it doesn't matter even if we can't acquire them fully as planned. Once the Twin Towers Kingdom falls, Zero Wing will have to beg us to help defend Starmoon Kingdom to keep those 2 cities. At that time, let alone obtaining shares to those 2 guild cities, we might even be able to acquire shares for Zero Wing City. After hearing Lu Tiandi's words, Hidden Cloud nodded in agreement. Although there was a slight change to their plans, the overall situation remained in their favor. The Dark Knight Empire had an advantage in players over the Outer World army, so it wouldn't be difficult to repel the enemy. After all, players did not fear death, unlike NPCs. Moreover, the Dark Knight Empire had opened its treasury to players this time. Players fighting for the Empire would receive contribution points if they managed to kill the Outer World NPCs, and these points could be exchanged for weapons and equipment. Hence, the Empire's players no longer had to worry about running out of weapons and equipment. The only uncertainty left in their plan now was Zero Wing's decision. Zero Wing could either choose to monopolize Zero Wing City's benefits and abandon Starmoon Kingdom and its 2 guild cities in the Orc Empire, or give away a portion of Zero Wing City's benefits to secure Starmoon Kingdom and those 2 guild cities. However, just when Lu Tiandi, Hidden Cloud, and the other superpowers executives present were about to continue discussing how to proceed in the current situation, a commotion suddenly erupted among the Winter Night Fortress's players. Moreover, it grew louder and louder as more time passed. This situation confused Lu Tiandi and the others, who were holding a meeting atop the fortress's wall. Guild Leader. Something big happened. Suddenly, a middle-aged man approached the group of executives hurriedly and arrived before Lu Tiandi. This person was none other than Ikue, Lu Tiandi's butler. At this time, Ikue had an anxious expression, his usual composure nowhere in sight. What happened? Why are you in such a hurry? Lu Tiandi asked in dissatisfaction as he looked at Ikue. As his butler and secretary in the guild, Ikue could be considered a representative of Starlink. Ikue was simply embarrassing Starlink by displaying such uncouth behavior in front of the various superpowers executives. Ikue hesitated to speak as he looked at the various representatives present. From Ikue's hesitancy, Lu Tiandi understood that his butler had something very important to tell him. He then said, "If you can't say it, send the information to me." Immediately, Ikue forwarded the relevant information to Lu Tiandi. Although this situation piqued the various executives' curiosity, none of them said anything about Lu Tiandi and Ikue's exchange. After all, every guild had its secrets. However, roughly 10 seconds after Lu Tiandi began reading the information Ikue provided, his expression changed drastically. He even failed to control himself and shouted his thoughts. Impossible! Lu Tiandi's loss of composure surprised the various superpowers executives. Lu Tiandi had criticized Ikue for the latter's loss of composure just a moment ago, yet he was now behaving even worse than Ikue. Just when the various superpowers executives were about to ask Lu Tiandi what information he had received, they suddenly received a message from their respective subordinates. The content of the message was simple, and it even came with a battle video attached. When the various executives played the battle video, what first entered their eyes was a man swinging a sword at one of the Outer Worlds player armies. However, the next moment, both a gigantic 9-headed snake and over 1/4 of the player army vanished along with a significant portion of the forest. Afterward, the remaining Outer World players scattered and fled the area. As for the man, he returned to the flying ship behind him and departed the area as well. A Crimson Dragon flying ship. Is he Black Flame? Questions and shock flooded the heads of the various superpowers executives. All of them were Tier 4 players, so despite the battle video's brevity, their eyes still managed to take note of every little detail in it. Although they couldn't see the 9-headed snake's information, based on the spatial fluctuations surrounding it, the monster was undoubtedly at the Tier 5 legendary rank. They also counted at least 4,000 Tier 4 players in the Outer Worlds player army, far more than what any single empire on the eastern continent had faced so far. Yet, Shifeng had not only killed the Tier 5 legendary monster with one attack but also defeated the army of millions. After several minutes of silence, the various superpowers executives snapped out of their daze one after another. However, their earlier complacency was nowhere to be seen, replaced by solemn expressions. Guild leader Lu, I still have something to do, so I'll be taking my leave first. Guild leader Lu, my superiors suddenly called me back for a meeting, so excuse me. Guild leader Lu, the next moment, the various superpowers executives gave all sorts of excuses and left the fortress in quick succession. Even Hidden Cloud, Lu Tiandi's staunch supporter, suddenly said he felt ill and logged out of the game to rest. In no time at all, only Lu Tiandi and Ikue remained on the fortress's wall. Ikue's complexion turned livid as he watched the various superpowers executives leave. He then asked Lu Tiandi, "What should we do now, young master?" The strength Shifeng displayed had already thoroughly exceeded their imagination. After the battle in the Shadow Forest, Ikue could already foresee the Outer Worlds players abandoning their attack on the Twin Towers Kingdom and Starmoon Kingdom. Since the Outer Worlds NPC army had split into several dozen groups, mainly targeting the various empires, Zero Wing should have no problem defending the Twin Towers Kingdom. Not to mention, Shifeng could solo Tier 5 legendary monsters. So long as he didn't foolishly rush into the NPC army's base camp, killing the Outer Worlds NPCs would be a cakewalk for him. In contrast to Zero Wing's situation, Starlink's situation was absolutely abysmal. If they went by the reactions of the various superpowers executives, these superpowers intended to abandon Starlink. We haven't lost yet, Lu Tiandi said as he sent a cold glare at Ikue. Black Flame is the core of everything. So long as we deal with Black Flame, everything else will be simple. But Black Flame's strength is extraordinary. The Grand Masters the various corporations sent last time are still lying in the hospital, Ikue said. Ikue had received a fright when he heard this news back then. That was a force of 14 half-step Grandmaster and Grandmaster level experts. Yet, these experts had actually lost. Moreover, according to them, Shifeng had defeated them all by himself. The strength he wielded was simply unbelievable. Moreover, the Grandmasters in the group even judged that Shifeng was most likely a mental strength master already. A mental strength master was an existence Starlink couldn't afford to offend, no matter what. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. At best, he has just become a mental strength master. He is still far from a match for my teacher, Lu Tiandi said coldly. I don't know what happened, but my teacher suddenly became interested in God's domain recently and now wants to gain control over a powerful force in God's domain. He even told me to figure out a way to do so. My original plan was to annex Zero Wing for myself, but seeing as that's not possible now, I can give it to my teacher instead. With Zero Wing's current influence and resources, there's no way my teacher won't be interested. Moreover, Black Flame even got my senior brother kicked out of the upper zone. Given my teacher's personality, he will deal with Black Flame, even if Black Flame is now a mental strength master. Lu Tiandi no longer held any hope of annexing Zero Wing's resources. Nevertheless, he couldn't let Shifeng off the hook so easily. After Lu Tiandi finished speaking, he assigned some tasks to Yi Kuei and logged off to contact his teacher. In the meantime, the various powers of God's domain had also received news of Shifeng defeating one of the Outer Worlds player armies. The superpowers were shaken for a time, and their fear of Zero Wing skyrocketed. Some superpowers even began planning to convey good intentions to Zero Wing. However, Shifeng wasn't present in God's domain to receive any of these good intentions, as he had promptly logged out of the game after returning to Sky Spring City. This was because today was the day he would receive his large mansion. Chapter 2904, Changing Times. Yuantian City's Upper Zone, Base Layer, Upper Class Mansion District. Brother Shi, I really have to congratulate you this time. This large mansion is the last one available in the base layer. You probably can't get another one in Yuantian City's upper zone even if you want to in the future, Hanifeng said when he saw Shifeng registering himself as the owner of the mansion in front of him. Looking at the three-story mansion, which occupied an area as large as half a football field, he couldn't repress his envy as he said, "You're only one of 3 people to own a large mansion as an individual in Yuantian City's upper zone." The base layer's 10 large mansions didn't just have the best position and environment. They also served as a status symbol. The only reason Hanifeng got to stay in a large mansion himself was his status as the 5 states corporation's heir. The other members of his family, even those with excellent performance, could stay in the large mansion for only a short period. In comparison, Shifeng had purchased a large mansion all by himself. Moreover, he wouldn't have any people disturbing his peace. The heirs and heads of the base layer's various corporations would be green with envy once they heard about this. The last one. Shifeng was a little surprised. Weren't there 2 left before? Did someone buy the other one during this time? Hmichum. They concluded the purchase yesterday, Hanifeng said, nodding. Sighing ruefully, he continued, moreover, you might very well know the person who bought it. I know them. Shifeng grew even more surprised. There were only 10 large mansions in the base layer, even a powerful organization like the Boulder Corporation didn't have the ability to purchase one. He found it truly hard to imagine that any of his acquaintances did. You might not know her in real life, but you've probably heard of her in God's domain, Hanifeng said, chuckling. Does the name Endless Scars or Weiyang Qianhen, 1, ring any bells? The Midnight Tea Party she belongs to is currently the target of recruitment of even the 5 great super guilds. Rumors say that she has already developed her mana body to the 120% completion rate, and she can probably get promoted to Tier 5 at any time. It's her. Shifeng was startled. He had a general idea of Endless Scars' identity. He was sure that she was the princess of a major corporation and that she might live in the upper zone. However, he never thought that Endless Scars would hold such great strength in the upper zone that she could afford a large mansion. It seems you do know her. Looking at Shifeng's surprised expression, Hanifeng smiled and said, she's quite something. You can even say that she's astounding. She managed to buy that mansion this time not because of her family but because her senior brother gifted it to her. Gifted? Shifeng was flabbergasted. He had spent a lot of 7 luminaries crystals to purchase a large mansion, and he didn't know how much time he would need to collect so many crystals again. That's right. It's because she has incredible talent. A big shot in the middle layer recently took her in as his student. I heard that this big shot even paid a high price to borrow a middle-layer reserve slot for her to help her break through to Mental Strength Master, Hanifeng said, a hint of envy appearing in his eyes. I have to admit that her talent is truly astonishing. She's been labeled the best talent Yuantian City's upper zone has seen in the past 100 years. Once she reaches the middle layer, she'll probably take only a few months to become a Mental Strength Master. And with her talent, beauty, and a middle-layer big shot supporting her, she naturally became the target of pursuit of many of the upper zone's youths. One of them is Qin Bai, her senior brother. Qin Bai is also an extraordinary talent. He successfully broke through and became a Mental Strength Master 2 years ago, the youngest Mental Strength Master in Yuantian City's upper zone in the past 20 years. Because Weiyang Qianhen arrived at Yuantian City's upper zone only recently, Qin Bai bought a large mansion as a temporary residence for her to adapt to the lifestyle here. Having spoken up to this point, Hanifeng, who was normally indifferent to his surroundings, betrayed some yearning for the woman named Weiyang Qianhen. After all, Mental Strength Masters were incredibly rare, and a beautiful Mental Strength Master was rarer. However, before Hanifeng could fantasize for long, Shifeng interrupted him, asking, "Young Master Han, do I need to go through any procedures to let other people live in this mansion long-term?" Fang Shihan had transferred 10 upper zone reserve slots, and he had already assigned them to Fire Dance and the others. The ordinary housing unit he had couldn't accommodate them all. Meanwhile, one would enjoy vastly different treatment depending on whether one had housing or not. A housing status didn't just signify that one had lodging, it also determined the exercise equipment and food one could gain access to, among other things. Those without housing could only enjoy the most common training facilities and food. If one wished to eat better food or rent the upper zone's high-tech training facilities, one needed to have housing status. There are some, Hanifeng said, nodding. All you need to do is register their identities at the Green God Tower. If you're not familiar with anyone there, you can come with me. It so happens that I also need to register someone to my mansion. At this point, Hanifeng no longer dared underestimate Shifeng. In fact, he had even begun placing great importance on Shifeng. Shifeng's defeating multiple Henglian grandmasters all by himself aside, just the position and resources Zero Wing currently held in God's domain already made the guild worthy of befriending for the upper zone's various organizations. After all, 7 luminaries crystals couldn't be acquired easily in God's domain. I'll have to trouble you then, young Master Han, Shifeng said. Although Shifeng understood Hanifeng's motives, he didn't reject the other party's goodwill. His partnership with Hanifeng might be a long-term one, as he was severely lacking in resources and trade points. Meanwhile, the 5 States Corporation possessed great influence in Yuantian City's upper zone. There should be a lot of things they could partner on in the future. Following this, Hanifeng gave Shifeng a rundown on the basics of the large mansion, then, the two made their way to the Green God Tower. The Green God Tower's lobby was as crowded as ever. Members of corporations and internal members of the Green God Company were lined up, waiting to exchange for various potions. These people easily numbered over 1,000, and more were still joining the line. The situation at the housing registration counter wasn't the slightest bit inferior, either. When Shifeng and Hanifeng entered the exchange center, a young and beautiful girl wearing a short-sleeved t-shirt and denim shorts noticed them. She immediately strode over with her long legs and approached them in a sprightly manner. Upon seeing the approaching girl, Hanifeng turned to Shifeng and said, "This is my younger cousin, Han Rongrong. The family recently decided to have her live in the mansion because of her talent." When Shifeng saw the lively girl in front of him, he was somewhat surprised. Firstly, it was because of Han Rongrong's talent. From what he could tell, the girl was only around 16 or 17 years old, yet she had already reached the half-step Henglian Grandmaster standard. Secondly, it was because Han Rongrong's appearance resembled the famous Chaos Witch of his previous life. Although Chaos Witch was labeled a witch, she didn't actually play a magical class in God's domain. Instead, she was a guardian knight. Unlike Gentle Snow and Phoenix Rain, who had risen to fame early on in God's domain, Chaos Witch had joined God's domain 2 years after its launch. However, her rise was rapid, getting promoted to Tier 5 in less than 2 years. She had also become one of God's domain's 12 sacred guardian knights and had been only half a step away from getting promoted to Tier 6. Hello. My name is Han Rongrong. I heard a lot about you from my cousin. He says you're very strong. If there's an opportunity, we must have a spar with each other. Han Rongrong said as she looked at Shi Feng with eyes sparkling with curiosity and fighting spirit. Rongrong, stop messing around. Brother Shi can defeat even Henglian grandmasters. Someone who isn't even a Henglian grandmaster has no business challenging him. Han Feng said as he glared at Han Rongrong. After taking a deep breath, he continued, let's head to the VIP hall to get the residence registration done. However, Han Rongrong paid no heed to Han Feng's scolding. She even made a funny face at Han Feng. While following behind her cousin, she quietly observed Shi Feng, the rumored extraordinary expert. The Green God Tower's VIP hall, located on the 22nd floor, was dedicated to receiving people of a certain status in the base layer. The base layer's average resident couldn't come here even if they wanted to. Only heirs of major corporations like Han Feng had the qualifications to do so. However, the so-called VIP hall wasn't anything special. It merely functioned as a specialized housing registration center. VIPs seeking to exchange for points and items still had to line up downstairs like everyone else. When Han Feng, Shi Feng, and Han Rongrong entered the VIP hall, they found it nearly empty. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. However, upon seeing a group of 5 in the hall, Han Feng couldn't help tensing up. Of the 5, 4 were male, and 1 was female. 3 of the 4 males were the top 3 rankers of the current contribution competition, while the last was a young man clad in white. As for the female, she was a beautiful young woman in a blue dress with an indifferent expression. Currently, the 4 males surrounded the woman. This woman was none other than Weiyang Qianhen, or Endless Scars, the person Han Feng mentioned earlier. When Shi Feng's group entered the hall, Weiyang Qianhen shifted her gaze toward them. Before Shi Feng and the others could react, she suddenly made her way toward them, causing Han Feng to widen his eyes in shock. Shi Feng, right? Or should I call you Guild Leader Black Flame? Weiyang Qianhen said, smiling faintly as she took in Shi Feng's dazed expression. You deceived me so badly before. Chapter 2905, High-Grade Authority. When Weiyang Qianhen finished speaking, both the men tagging along with her and Han Feng turned to look at Shi Feng in disbelief. Weiyang Qianhen's tone was gentle. Although her words sounded reproachful, they were actually intimate. Han Feng found this situation particularly unbelievable. He looked at Shi Feng as if he was looking at a monster, his mouth nearly failing to close properly. Weiyang Qianhen currently enjoyed a lofty position in Yuantian City's upper zone, far out of even the 5 states corporation's reach. Many youths in Yuantian City's upper zone could only dream of getting acquainted with Weiyang Qianhen, let alone having her strike up a conversation with them. Previously, when Han Feng spoke with Shi Feng about Weiyang Qianhen, he thought Shi Feng only knew of the woman's existence. After all, the Midnight Tea Party was extremely famous in God's domain as one of the best adventurer teams in the game. Anyone with a reliable information network in God's domain would have heard of it. Han Feng never thought that the two of them were actually acquaintances and shared a good relationship. Meanwhile, in response to Weiyang Qianhen's questioning, Shi Feng smiled bitterly and said, "It seems I've made a fool of myself in front of Miss Weiyang. However, I was forced by circumstances to hide my true identity back then." You sure know how to act mature, Weiyang Qianhen said sourly. Previously, she had thought Shi Feng was older than her, at least in his 30s, which explained how he came to possess such incredible strength. Afterward, she had constantly thought of surpassing Shi Feng one day, going as far as to leave the Midnight Tea Party for a long period to train like crazy. After all, Shi Feng had given her a lot of surprises during their initial meeting. She never thought a person could become so powerful. However, just when she thought she was catching up to Shi Feng, she received a shocking piece of news. Black Flame's true identity was actually that of a young man who wasn't even 25. Moreover, he was a bona fide self-made expert who didn't possess the slightest bit of background or expert guidance. She had fallen into depression for quite some time after learning about this. Shi Feng laughed blankly at Wei Yang Qianhen's comment. In reality, it wasn't wrong to say that he was a man in his 30s. After all, he had been one when he reincarnated. It's been a while since we met, and it seems you've undergone an amazing transformation. You're now a celebrity in Yuantian City's upper zone. Me? That's where you are wrong. Wei Yang Qianhen shook her head. She then pointed at the white-clad youth nearby and said, I'd better introduce you to my senior brother. When Wei Yang Qianhen said the words senior brother, she deliberately emphasized the word senior, causing the white-clad youth to smile bitterly before walking over. And this is? When Shi Feng looked at Qin Bai, he found the white-clad youth somewhat familiar. He felt as if he had met the other party somewhere before, yet he couldn't recall where. Hello, Guild Leader Black Flame. We meet again, Qin Bai greeted with a smile. Again? Have we met before? Shi Feng grew confused when he saw Qin Bai greeting him like an old acquaintance. Of course you've met. He likes to act mature, exactly like you. Wei Yang Qianhen said as she glared at Qin Bai, gritting her teeth slightly. Smiling awkwardly, Qin Bai said, let me introduce myself. You can call me by my real name, Qin Bai. You can also call me by my game ID, Breeze Wine. Breeze Wine. You're Breeze Wine. Shi Feng was startled when he heard Qin Bai's words. Breeze Wine was the Midnight Tea Party's commander, someone Shi Feng had met and was relatively familiar with. However, the white-clad youth in front of him had a completely different look and bearing from Breeze Wine's wildness and boldness. While Shi Feng was feeling surprised, Hanifeng, who stood beside him, was deeply shocked. Qin Bai was not only a mental strength master but also the youngest mental strength master in Yuantian City's upper zone. Who would have thought that a mental strength master was actually the commander of a 20-man adventurer team? Yet, God's Domain's various super first-rate guilds and super guilds had ignorantly used threats against the Midnight Tea Party to recruit the adventurer team. Those superpowers were simply tired of living. Don't mind it, Qin Bai said awkwardly when he saw the surprise on Shi Feng's face. I wasn't hiding it. Playing God's Domain is just one of my hobbies. After hearing Qin Bai's introduction, Shi Feng finally understood how Wei Yang Qianhen managed to catch the eye of a middle-layer big shot. It was very likely due to Qin Bai's introduction. Shi Feng also understood why the Midnight Tea Party wasn't afraid of the various superpowers and could continue existing all this time. With Qin Bai's status, which superpower in God's Domain would dare offend him? Seeing Shi Feng in deep thought, Qin Bai took the initiative to say, Guild Leader Black Flame, you and your friends must be here to register your housing status as well, right? We are also here to deal with housing matters. Why don't we get it done together? I'll be in your care, then, Shi Feng said, accepting the offer. There were still a few people lined up, waiting to get their business done in the hall. If Qin Bai was willing to help expedite the procedure, it was naturally good news for Shi Feng. After all, the sooner he got gentle Snow and Aqua Rose into the large mansion, the sooner he could alleviate the stress on their mind. Naturally, Hanifeng also didn't refuse the offer. He wanted nothing more than to establish a connection with Qin Bai right now. Although the Five States Corporation had a solid foundation in the base layer, the influence the corporation held in the upper zone was still insignificant compared to Qin Bai's. If Hanifeng could get acquainted with Qin Bai now, he would have an easier time when he entered the middle layer. After all, the middle layer wasn't an easy place to survive in. The competition there was even fiercer than in the base layer. Subsequently, the group had all its needs taken care of in less than 10 minutes. When the group arrived at the Green God Tower's entrance and was about to part ways, a commotion erupted from the street outside. The next moment, a maglev car suddenly descended from the sky and landed in front of the entrance, catching the attention of all the nearby pedestrians. Although the upper zone allowed residents to drive their own cars, that was limited to road use. Cars were prohibited from flying. The only ones allowed to do so were people with very high status in the upper zone. After the maglev car parked in front of the Green God Tower's entrance, two people, one young and one old, emerged from it. The young man was none other than Lu Tiandi, Starline Corporation's current heir. However, Lu Tiandi showed none of his usual arrogance, standing humbly and respectfully behind the black-robed elderly man. At this old man's appearance, many of the corporation heirs present gasped reflexively. Hanifeng's expression even paled when he saw the man. Why would he come here personally? Hanifeng's eyes were filled with disbelief as he looked at the approaching black-clad elder. This was because the black-clad old man was none other than the Infinity Master of Haitian City's upper zone, a mental strength master holding 2-star high-grade authority in the upper zone. In the upper zone, the Green God Company would award anyone who had become mental strength masters with high-grade authority and permanent residence in the upper zone's middle layer. However, as mental strength masters were not equal, high-grade authority was also categorized into different ranks, from 1 star to 3 stars. Most mental strength masters in the upper zone held only 1-star high-grade authority, with only a small number holding 2-star high-grade authority. For 2-star authority holders, their position in the middle layer rivaled the middle layer's general managers. The Green God Company awarded those who reached 2-star authority with 1 permanent reserve slot for the middle layer and the authority to banish disrespectful mental strength masters from the upper zone for a duration of 1 to 3 years. Meanwhile, Hanifeng knew that the Infinity Master, Fu Jiuzhong, held a slight grudge against Shifeng. However, in his opinion, someone like Fu Jiuzhong had no reason to take action personally. At most, the Infinity Master would send some of his subordinates to harass Shifeng. Doing more wouldn't be befitting of his status. Yet, contrary to Hanifeng's expectations, Fu Jiuzhong had made a personal visit to Yuantian City's upper zone. After arriving before Shifeng, Fu Jiuzhong demanded with a lofty aura, "Are you Shifeng? The one who caused my student, Wang Xianming, to get kicked out of the upper zone?" When Fu Jiuzhong finished speaking, the surrounding passers-by couldn't help looking at Shifeng with pity. At the same time, they also wondered who Shifeng was to warrant the Infinity Master's direct intervention. Moreover, based on Fu Jiuzhong's tone, if this situation wasn't handled properly, he might very well utilize his authority to banish Shifeng from the upper zone for some time. And once outside the safe zone known as the upper zone, Shifeng was unlikely to keep his life. At this time, Qin Bai stepped forward with a smile and said, "Master Fu, this person here is my friend. Is there perhaps a misunderstanding here?" "Misunderstanding? I don't think so." Glancing at Qin Bai, Fu Jiuzhong said, "Also, you'd best not interfere in this matter. I don't care, even if you have your teacher's support. Master Fu, although you have 2-star high-grade authority, this is Yuantian City's upper zone." Qin Bai said with a solemn look. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qin Bai felt a little helpless against Fu Jiuzhong right now. He was but an entry mental strength master, no match for a veteran like Fu Jiuzhong. Only his teacher could possibly put up a fight against the Infinity Master. After all, the 2-star high-grade authority wasn't just a status symbol for a mental strength master, it also symbolized strength. So what? Fu Jiuzhong sneered. Let alone you, even if your teacher personally shows up now, I still won't give a damn. You. Qin Bai was helpless at the moment. If Fu Jiuzhong intended to abuse his authority now, Bai Qini wouldn't be able to do anything about it with only his 1-star high-grade authority. After all, these were the Green God Company's rules. As for what kind of excuse Fu Jiuzhong would give to get the Green God Company to banish Shifeng from the upper zone, he could simply trump up random offenses. However, as Qin Bai was thinking of how to buy time and get his teacher to come and help, Shifeng suddenly stepped forward. Wang Xianming, is it? Looking at Fu Jiuzhong, Shifeng responded neither humbly nor arrogantly, "If you're talking about that home intruder, I am indeed the one who handed him over to the Green God Company. May I know what guidance you have to provide, Master Fu?" Chapter 2906, Combating a Mental Strength Master. Although Shifeng spoke in a tone that was neither humble nor arrogant, the surrounding passers-by and Hanifeng couldn't help falling silent, a hint of shock appearing in their eyes. That's the Infinity Master he's talking to. Has he lost his mind? Han Yifeng felt his legs weaken when he saw Shi Feng's unyielding attitude. For long-time residents of the upper zone, mental strength masters were existences that shouldn't be provoked, all the more so a mental strength master with 2-star high-grade authority. Even the base layer's top-ranking organizations wouldn't dare to offend such an existence. Mental strength masters with 2-star authority could not only banish people from the upper zone for long periods but also teach those who offended them a lesson with little to no repercussions. While the Green God Company might penalize the mental strength master by deducting their trade points and contribution points, such penalties were nothing for a mental strength master of such caliber. Although Shi Feng's words and manner of speaking couldn't be considered offensive to Fu Jiuzhong, it was still a slap to the face for the Infinity Master. Han Yifeng failed to understand why Shi Feng would step forward himself instead of letting Qin Bai cover for him. In his opinion, Shi Feng's action was simply insane. At this time, let alone Han Yifeng, even Han Rongrong, who had been quite courageous before and even dared to challenge Shi Feng, shuddered involuntarily in fear. This was because a bone-biting chill was enveloping her entire body right now. Killing intent. This was a frightening killing intent Han Rongrong had never experienced before. The killing intent was so intense that Han Rongrong, a half-step Henglian Grandmaster, had the illusion that she would get killed the next moment. Her terror was so overwhelming that it had taken over her body, making her tremble despite herself. So, this is the strength of a 2-star master. Weiyang Qianhen revealed an indescribably grim expression as she looked at Fu Jiuzhong, feeling somewhat uncomfortable before the Infinity Master's mental deterrence. She had sparred with Qin Bai previously, so she wasn't completely ignorant of the strength of mental strength masters. However, compared to Qin Bai, Fu Jiuzhong was on a completely different level. From sparring with Qin Bai, she had come to understand that his mental perception and brain activity were vastly superior to hers. If he was willing to pay the price, he could even increase his brain activity and perception sensitivity by more than 10-fold at will, allowing him to make inhuman reactions. Fu Jiuzhong, on the other hand, wasn't just capable of simply boosting his thinking speed, he could already influence others with his mental will. It was akin to employing powerful hypnosis on his opponents. Most importantly, this mental deterrence wasn't directed at her but merely spillover. She found it truly hard to imagine what kind of hell the actual target of Fu Jiuzhong's mental power was experiencing right now. Of those present, only Qin Bai fared slightly better. Even so, he was still affected by Fu Jiuzhong's mental deterrence. Damn it! It's over. Fu Jiuzhong has actually broken through to that stage already. There's no way someone who hasn't reached the level of a mental strength master can resist this mental deterrence. Qin Bai inwardly cursed this situation as he endured Fu Jiuzhong's mental deterrence. In Qin Bai's opinion, Shi Feng was an excellent seedling. Not only did Shi Feng become a neutralizing grandmaster at a young age, but his mental strength standard had already reached the peak of the special grade. According to the report he received, Shi Feng had even defeated several Henglian grandmasters simultaneously. With such ability, Shi Feng might very well be only half a step away from becoming a mental strength master. Originally, Qin Bai planned to learn more about Shi Feng and then introduce Shi Feng to his teacher. However, all of his plans were ruined now. Mental deterrence was something that liberated a person's deepest fears. For this reason, it was normal for the minds of people subjected to mental deterrence to collapse. If a person had weak willpower, they might even die on the spot. Even people with very strong willpower would suffer trauma when subjected to mental deterrence, which would impact their future mental growth. Normally, only 3-star mental strength masters could exhibit mental deterrence. Although Fu Jiuzhong's mental deterrence wasn't as strong as an actual 3-star master's, his use of this technique proved that he was already close to reaching the 3-star standard. He might have already taken a step into the stage. However, when Qin Bai turned to look at Shi Feng, he was stunned. How is this possible? Fu Jiuzhong had clearly directed his mental deterrence at Shi Feng. Yet, apart from wearing a slightly solemn expression, Shi Feng showed no fear or discomfort on his face. It was evident that he could withstand the Infinity Master's mental deterrence. In fact, he was enduring it much better than even Qin Bai. Ha! Fu Jiuzhong remained mostly unfazed even after seeing Shi Feng's reaction, sneering, I initially had suspicions when I heard Tiandi say you might have become a mental strength master already, but I didn't think you had really become one. When Fu Jiuzhong finished speaking, everyone present turned to Shi Feng in disbelief. Han Feng, in particular, was thunderstruck by this revelation. Is he still human? The first time Han Feng met Shi Feng, the latter was merely the guild leader of a large guild. Although Shi Feng possessed some strength at the time, it was still insignificant in Han Feng's eyes. The next time they met, Shi Feng had already become a resident in the upper zone, with a considerable amount of resources that could be traded for contribution points. Now, Shi Feng had even become a mental strength master, an existence many corporations operating in the upper zone's base layer feared. Shi Feng's growth speed was simply out of this world. Han Feng wasn't the only one shocked by this revelation. Qin Bai similarly felt his heart pounding madly. A mental strength master under the age of 25? Previously, Qin Bai still had his doubts about Shi Feng being a mental strength master. However, since Fu Jiuzhong had said so, then it must be true. Nevertheless, he found it difficult to digest this information. Mental strength masters were special existences in the upper zone, the goal of countless young talents. However, typically, one could already be proud of oneself if one became a mental strength master by the age of 60 or 70. Qin Bai's achievement of becoming a mental strength master in his 30s already made him a rare talent that only appeared once every several decades in Yuantian City's upper zone. However, compared to Shi Feng, Qin Bai's achievement paled significantly. At Shi Feng's age, the growth rate of his mental strength was still at its peak. Only after the age of 30 would his growth slow than 5 years of rapid growth. If he continued developing himself, he could definitely become a 3-star mental strength master in the future, and possibly even reach the legendary Grandmaster standard. When Qin Bai thought about the possibility of introducing Shi Feng to his teacher, excitement filled his heart. However, before Qin Bai could grow excited for long, Fu Jiuzhong suddenly changed his tone and said coldly, your achievement of becoming a mental strength master might be excellent, but do you think you can behave arrogantly in front of me just because you've become one? After saying so, Fu Jiuzhong suddenly punched at Shi Feng. Although Fu Jiuzhong had only executed a textbook punch, in everyone's eyes, this punch seemed to carry the power of heaven and earth. The power of this punch was unstoppable, and everyone instinctively tried to run away. Not good. Qin Bai's expression immediately underwent a drastic change. Dodge it. Fu Jiuzhong's punch didn't just exude a mighty aura that daunted others' hearts. The Infinity Master had also removed the limiters on his body to exhibit 100% of his body's strength. Moreover, he had perfectly concentrated this strength into his fist. Even a bona fide 3-star master would have difficulty blocking this punch. It was evident that after seeing Shi Feng's true potential, Fu Jiuzhong intended to cripple Shi Feng to rid himself of a future threat. Shi Feng, the target of Fu Jiuzhong's punch, understood how powerful the oncoming attack was. Fu Jiuzhong's fist wasn't the only threat like most people thought. There was also the intent from the Infinity Master's fist. Although the fist intent didn't have a tangible form, it was by no means harmless. Moreover, even if Shi Feng could evade Fu Jiuzhong's fist intent, he couldn't dodge the punch itself. And although Shi Feng didn't know how powerful Fu Jiuzhong's punch was, he had a hunch that if he allowed the fist to connect, he would end up either crippled or dead. And worse, he couldn't stop the punch with his current strength utilization technique. This was because he was currently incapable of removing all of the limiters his brain placed on his body. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You know. I will not let things end like this. As Shi Feng watched Fu Jiuzhong's fist moving closer and closer to him, his brain raced, thinking of ways to block the punch. When Fu Jiuzhong's fist was only half a meter away, a potentially viable technique suddenly occurred to Shi Feng, a technique he had wanted to use in the real world all this time but couldn't due to physical fitness and mental capacity limitations. Block it. With a shout, Shi Feng concentrated the strength of his body and removed the limiters on his 2 arms. He then brandished his arms as if he were brandishing swords and instantly executed the sword technique he had used thousands of times in God's domain. Swords Transmigration. Chapter 2907, Taking on a 3-star Mental Strength Master Bang. Along with the sound of an explosion, the ambient air fluctuated, and even those standing more than 10 meters away from Shifeng and Fu Jiuzhong felt these shock waves. The next moment, Fu Jiuzhong's punch came to an abrupt end, while Shifeng stumbled several steps back before he managed to stabilize his body. The outcome of the initial confrontation between the two mental strength masters was clear for all to see. However, this result had Hanifeng and the others looking at Shifeng in shock and disbelief. He blocked it. How did he do it? Fu Jiuzhong's punch was akin to a behemoth's attack. One could tell how much power the punch carried just by looking at the shattered stone slabs under Fu Jiuzhong's feet. The upper zone's pavement was extraordinary, its hardness comparable to steel. Even a Henglian Grandmaster's full-powered attack would, at most, crack it. Yet, the stone slabs directly under Fu Jiuzhong's feet had basically disintegrated, while the adjacent slabs had web-like cracks spread across them. Fu Jiuzhong's punch could probably knock a car back over a dozen meters. The attack undoubtedly reached inhuman levels already. What did he do just now? Qin Bai stared at the uninjured Shifeng in confusion. Compared to the other spectators, Qin Bai had a far better understanding of how much power Fu Jiuzhong's punch carried. An entry-level mental strength master would be fortunate to sustain only minor injuries from the punch, let alone emerge intact. Typically, if the average human removed all of the limiters restricting their body, they could lift an entire car. Meanwhile, Fu Jiuzhong was a mental strength master who had tempered his body over several decades. One could easily imagine how much power he could exert if he removed his limiters and concentrated all his strength into his fist. Of course, executing such a move would also place a huge burden on the body. If an ordinary person tried replicating Fu Jiuzhong's move without having absolute control over their physical body, they would most likely end up crippled afterward. This was because the limiters the brain placed was a form of protection for one's body. However, it was a different story for mental strength masters of Fu Jiuzhong's caliber. Currently, not only did Fu Jiuzhong have perfect control over his body's strength, but he could also freely turn his body's limiters on and off. So long as he turned off his limiters the moment he attacked and instantly turned them back on after executing his attack, he could minimize the damage to his body. He might even be able to offset the damage completely by using his body's resilience. And this was also what made 3-star mental strength masters so frightening. On the other hand, Shifeng was evidently incapable of removing all of his body's limiters right now. Yet, by relying on a strange technique and incredible speed, he had successfully blocked Fu Jiuzhong's punch. More precisely, he had deflected the power of the Infinity Master's punch and received only part of the attack's power and impact. This feat was simply incredible. In reality, Qin Bai wasn't the only one surprised by this outcome. Shifeng himself felt shocked and ecstatic. He never thought his plan would succeed. Although he had failed to fully replicate Sword's transmigration just now, the incomplete technique still allowed him to resist Fu Jiuzhong's full-powered blow. However, Shifeng now felt his mind stagnating slightly, due to using Sword's transmigration with his mortal body. His brain had evidently overloaded itself to enable his body to execute the technique. He diverted my strength? Fu Jiuzhong eyed Shifeng in incomprehension. He couldn't understand how Shifeng's two strange chopping strikes had managed to scatter the power in his fist. At the moment of contact, he had felt some kind of power invade his body and deform his posture slightly. This, in turn, caused the power of his punch to plummet and allowed Shifeng to escape unscathed. Was it luck? Fu Jiuzhong shook his head, dismissing his thoughts. He promptly dashed toward Shifeng and executed a flurry of punches, giving him no time to catch a breather or create another miracle. Fu Jiuzhong had come to Yuantian City's upper zone intending to teach Shifeng a lesson, have Shifeng give up a significant portion of Zero Wings shares, and avenge his student. After seeing Shifeng's potential, though, he realized there was no way the young man would give up Zero Wings shares. However, reconciliation between them wasn't possible after Fu Jiuzhong had sent the various corporations' experts after Shi Feng. Fu Jiuzhong also couldn't forgive the arrogant behavior Shi Feng took in front of him. Hence, only one path remained open to Fu Jiuzhong: crippling Shi Feng and utilizing his mental deterrence to arouse Shi Feng's inner fears. Even if Shi Feng was a mental strength master, this would still leave an indelible trauma in his heart. If that happened, Shi Feng's future as a mental strength master would be over. And while Fu Jiuzhong would suffer repercussions from the Green God Company afterward, the penalty wouldn't be anything severe. After all, there was no way the Green God Company would choose to lose a 3-star mental strength master after already losing a young talent. Fu Jiuzhong executed his punches with all his might, without a fixed pattern. Of course, with how fast his attacks were, Fu Jiuzhong couldn't concentrate all his strength into every punch. Hence, the punches he currently executed were significantly weaker than his first one. Even so, they still weren't attacks an ordinary mental strength master could receive. After images of Fu Jiuzhong's fists filled the space between Fu Jiuzhong and Shi Feng. Even ordinary mental strength masters, who could amplify their perception by more than tenfold, couldn't adequately capture every one of these punches with their senses. Is he nuts? Shi Feng's complexion changed as he faced Fu Jiuzhong's attacks. Even an expert of Fu Jiuzhong's caliber would suffer serious injuries if he executed so many attacks without any limiters. The fact that he was doing so was simply ridiculous. However, Shi Feng also had to admit that Fu Jiuzhong's attacks were effective. He could hardly keep up with the attacks, let alone execute swords transmigration to deflect them. When Fu Jiuzhong's punches were about to reach him, Shi Feng gritted his teeth and liberated the limiters on his muscles once more. He then brandished his arms as if they were 2 long swords. Swords orbit. Bang! 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 Less than 1 meter separated Fu Jiuzhong and Shi Feng as they clashed in front of the Green God Tower. Although none of the surrounding pedestrians could see the arms of either mental strength master, the numerous thunderous explosions and shock waves made everyone feel as if they were standing in a storm. 2 seconds into the clash, Shi Feng began retreating step by step, evidently at a disadvantage. And although Shi Feng had successfully deflected all of Fu Jiuzhong's punches thus far, his complexion grew paler and paler as time passed. Let's see how long you can last. Fu Jiuzhong sneered when he saw Shi Feng's poor complexion. Although Fu Jiuzhong was sustaining heavy damage by executing so many attacks with his limiters fully liberated, the damage wasn't unbearable. At worst, he would have to consume life potions for a month, but all his injuries would eventually disappear as if they never existed. However, it was a different story for Shi Feng. If the young man failed to hold on now, he would be crippled in the future. The seconds ticked by one after another. Qin Bai, who was watching the entire fight, grew increasingly anxious. "Senior brother, is there nothing you can do?" Weiyang Qianhen asked when she saw Shi Feng's ashen face. In a frustrated tone, Qin Bai responded, "I want to step in, but the fight between them is no longer at a level where I can intervene. I might even make the situation worse for Shi Feng. All we can do is wait for teacher to arrive." Qin Bai wanted nothing more than to intervene in the fight, but he simply lacked the ability to do so. After all, even after pushing his senses to their limits, he still couldn't keep up with Shi Feng's and Fu Jiuzhong's movements. If he charged in recklessly, he might get sent flying by some random attack. 10 seconds into the fight, Fu Jiuzhong's complexion began turning red, while Shi Feng's turned deathly pale. A look of deep fatigue also surfaced in Shi Feng's eyes, and it was evident he could last only a few more seconds. Die! Fu Jiuzhong accelerated his punches when he noticed Shi Feng faltering. He planned to end the fight right here and now. Upon seeing this, Qin Bai reflexively closed his eyes, while Weiyang Qianhen's complexion turned grim. Just as Fu Jiuzhong's fists were about to overwhelm Shi Feng's defense, a rebuke suddenly echoed in everyone's ears. "Both of you, stop fighting this instant." Although this voice wasn't deafening, it still stimulated everyone's mind and compelled them to obedience. Among those present, only Fu Jiuzhong, Shi Feng, and Qin Bai remained mostly unaffected by the voice. However, immediately afterward, an incomparably powerful mental deterrence assaulted Fu Jiuzhong and Shi Feng, causing them to stumble back several steps. This scene amazed the surrounding spectators, and everyone couldn't help wondering about the identity of the voice's owner. When everyone turned toward the voice's origin, what they saw were two people walking out of the Green God Tower's entrance. One was a beautiful woman with her black hair tied into a ponytail, and the other was a white-clad old man walking with a hunched back and a cane. Most of the people present quickly recognized the woman. She was none other than Xia Qingying, the base layer's general manager. The old man Xia Qingying was supporting, though, was someone unfamiliar to them. Only Qin Bai recognized the old man, and he couldn't help a look of panic and disbelief at seeing the old man. Looking at the approaching old man, Fu Jiuzhong gnashed his teeth and yelled, "Wu Yuan! I'm only teaching an arrogant kid a lesson. Are you going to interfere in this as well?" The white-clad old man's name was Xia Wu Yuan. In addition to being the middle-layer general manager of Yuantian City's upper zone, he was also a bona fide 3-star mental strength master, someone with real authority in Yuantian City's upper zone. Rumor had it that he was only half a step away from becoming a mental strength grandmaster. However, for Fu Jiuzhong, who had just recently become a 3-star mental strength master, Xia Wu Yuan wasn't in existence to fear. "Jiuzhong, this is Yuantian City's upper zone. Do you take this place for a joke?" Xia Wu Yuan said as he glanced at Fu Jiuzhong. "This matter ends here. Shi Feng is already a talent Yuantian City's upper zone has set its eyes on. I won't sit still if you persist in making a scene." Xia Wu Yuan's words thundered in Fu Jiuzhong's ears, causing his expression to turn ugly. Fu Jiuzhong then glared at Shi Feng and said coldly, "Consider yourself lucky today, kid. However, don't think you'll be as lucky next time." After saying so, Fu Jiuzhong got back into his maglev car together with Lu Tiandi and departed the area, disinclined to exchange any more words with Xia Wu Yuan. "Teacher, are we going to let Shi Feng go, just like that?" Lu Tiandi asked. With them having thoroughly offended Shi Feng, if they didn't cripple Shi Feng now, he would definitely become a thorn in their side with his extraordinary potential. After taking a deep breath, Fu Jiuzhong shook his head and said, "That old ghost is already close to crossing that threshold. I can't go up against him. However, that doesn't mean I'll let that kid off. After I apply for 3-star high-grade authority and get it approved, I'll have one chance to train in the core area and solidify my gains. Once that happens, that kid won't be able to stop me as easily as he did today." Lu Tiandi breathed out a sigh of relief at Fu Jiuzhong's words. If Fu Jiuzhong could train in the upper zone's core area even for a short period, he would definitely return stronger and would have a much easier time dealing with Shi Feng. Most importantly, Fu Jiuzhong could afford to do a lot more things once he gained 3-star high-grade authority. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Meanwhile, after Fu Jiuzhong and Lu Tiandi left, Shi Feng hurriedly approached Xia Qingying and Xia Wu Yuan to thank them. If not for Xia Wu Yuan's intervention, Shi Feng really would have succumbed to Fu Jiuzhong's attacks. "This little fellow has quite the talent," Xia Wu Yuan thought to himself as he scrutinized Shi Feng. He then said, "Qingying mentioned you to me before. She said you were even more talented than Bai. I initially thought she was joking, so it is fortunate I had some business here today. Otherwise, Fu Jiuzhong would have crippled you. Thank you for helping me, Elder Xia." "Thank you as well, General Manager Xia," Shi Feng said as he looked at Xia Wu Yuan and Xia Qingying nodding at Shi Feng. Xia Qingying said, "You really surprised me. Although I've long since known you would become a mental strength master sooner or later, I didn't expect you to break through in such a short time. It seems I didn't invite my grandfather here in vain." Shi Feng grew a little awkward after hearing Xia Qingying's words, unsure of how to explain himself. After all, his rapid growth was a complete accident. "Ahem, that's enough talking. You'll have plenty of chances to talk in the future," Xia Wu Yuan said, faking a cough. He then looked at Shi Feng and said, "Kid, now that you've become a mental strength master, come with me to the middle layer." Chapter 2908, Middle Layer. We're going to the middle layer now. Shi Feng was a little surprised by Xia Wuyuan's words. According to his understanding, while one could indeed live in the middle layer once one became a mental strength master, one would first need to clear the Green God Company's internal test and review. One couldn't enter the middle layer simply on the assumption that one was a mental strength master already. After all, the middle layer was an incredibly important location for the Green God Company. Even the middle layer's official residents needed to undergo strict inspections every time they entered and left. When Qin Baiyi overheard Xia Wuyuan's words, he was dumbfounded. Qin Baiyi still remembered that after he became a mental strength master, he had to go through an incredibly troublesome process to gain access to the middle layer. Yet, Shi Feng could enter the middle layer before even receiving the Green God Company's recognition. However, Xia Wuyuan indeed had the authority to make such a decision as the middle layer's general manager. Even if Shi Feng weren't a mental strength master, Xia Wuyuan could still bring him into the middle layer, just without official residential status. Of course. Although you haven't passed our internal test and review yet, the fact that you held your ground against Fu Jiuzhong proves that you are indeed a mental strength master, Xia Wuyuan said, nodding. He then smiled and continued, since you are now one of Yuantian City's upper zone's mental strength masters, you naturally have to get registered at the middle layer immediately. Or are you telling me you don't want the middle layer's residential status? Of course not, Shi Feng said hurriedly. It will naturally be wonderful if I can get my residential status for the middle zone right now. The resources available to the middle layer's residents were beyond the reach of the base layer's residents. Specifically, he could purchase life water once he gained middle layer residential status. Good. Let's go, then. After Xia Wuyuan finished speaking, he waved his hand, and a maglev limousine marked with the Green God Company's logo descended from the sky. He then entered the limousine together with Xia Qingying and Shi Feng, and the three of them flew straight toward the mountain's halfway point. At this sight, Han Yifeng and the other corporation heirs aiming to enter the middle layer inevitably grew envious. Brother Shi's status is going to skyrocket now. Han Yifeng was filled with complex emotions as he watched Shi Feng depart. Han Yifeng had constantly been seeking to gain the privilege to live in the middle layer. Yet, Shi Feng now had this privilege at his fingertips. Shi Feng had even gained the attention of Xia Wuyuan, the middle layer's general manager. Even after entering the middle layer, Shi Feng would not have to fear being targeted. What a pity. Qin Baiyi also sighed inwardly at this situation. If the middle layer's big shots found out about Shi Feng's talent, they would desperately try to get him as their student. Qin Baiyi's teacher wouldn't be an exception. Now, though, Xia Wuyuan had gotten ahead of everyone. A mental strength master, is it? I'll soon catch up to you. Unlike Qin Baiyi and the others, when Weiyang Qianhen saw Shi Feng departing for the middle layer, the urge to compete with Shi Feng bloomed in her heart. On the other side, Shi Feng's group arrived in the middle layer after going through multiple electronic scans and inspections. Upon entering the mist-shrouded area, Shi Feng felt a significant portion of his accumulated mental fatigue clear up. The middle layer's recovery effects were drastically better than those of the large mansion's environment. When Xia Wuyuan brought Shi Feng to a mansion flanked by a lush mountainside and a small waterfall, Shi Feng was completely stunned by the environment. Isn't the environment here a little too amazing? It's at least twice as good as the environment I felt when I entered the middle layer. Even without doing anything, I can probably live up to 160 or 170 years old in such an environment, Shi Feng exclaimed as he experienced the changes the mansion's environment brought to his body. This is one of only 20 top-tier mansions in the middle layer. Let alone 160 or 170, a Henglian Grandmaster can live up to 200 here without any problems, Xia Wuyuan said, chuckling. As the Green God Company's life technology continues improving, the lifespan of the middle layer's residents will also increase. Eventually, this place will let even ordinary people live up to 200 years old. As for mental strength masters like yourself, you might live to celebrate your 300th birthday. 300? Shi Feng was a little dazed. 300 years was already enough for a change in dynasties during ancient times. That's right. Although it is still somewhat difficult to reach such an age in the middle layer right now, the improvement is only a matter of time, Xia Wuyuan said, nodding. However, if you become a mental strength grandmaster, reaching 300 won't be difficult at all. Are mental strength grandmasters that strong? Shi Feng asked in surprise. With his current physical fitness, even with the support of life potions and the middle layer's environment, he could, at most, live to around 200 years old. He dared not think about living up to 300. Yet, Xia Wuyuan stated that a mental strength grandmaster could currently live up to 3 centuries. This was incredible. Of course. Mental strength grandmasters are much stronger than you think. They can exert 100% control over their brains. To ordinary people, they are no different from gods. The Green God Company's creator was also a mental strength grandmaster, Xia Wuyuan said, awe and envy appearing on his face. Shi Feng was stunned once more. The Green God Company was the most influential corporation in the world. The combined influence of every other corporation worldwide couldn't match the Green God Company's influence. Shi Feng never imagined that the founder of this corporation was a mental strength grandmaster. This was simply unbelievable. Seeing Shi Feng's dazed expression, Xia Wuyuan added, you, too, have a small possibility of becoming a mental strength grandmaster. It is for this possibility that I brought you to the middle layer. Only by living here can you better develop your mental strength. Letting you remain in the base layer is simply a huge waste. Shi Feng immediately came to a realization when he heard Xia Wuyuan's words. It was no wonder Xia Wuyuan brought him straight to the middle layer without undergoing the Green God Company's test. When Xia Wuyuan saw Shi Feng's contemplative expression, he smiled faintly and asked, you're thinking that with your potential, I'm underestimating you by saying that you only have a small possibility of becoming a mental strength grandmaster, right? Shi Feng didn't deny Xia Wuyuan's guess. In his opinion, if the Tier 5 concentration standard of God's domain represented the master standard for mental strength in the real world, then the Tier 6 concentration standard should correspond to the mental strength grandmaster standard. Meanwhile, Shi Feng was relatively confident that he could get promoted to Tier 6 in his current state. After all, he had an ancient god's legacy. He even had items that improved concentration, such as the Soul Water and Crystal of Souls. Raising his concentration to the Tier 6 standard with the help of these items shouldn't be difficult. As if having seen through Shi Feng's thoughts, Xia Wuyuan said, even if your concentration reaches the Tier 6 standard in God's domain, you will still be a long way from becoming a mental strength grandmaster. According to God's domain's concentration categorization, the Tier 6 concentration standard is only equivalent to the half-step mental strength grandmaster standard. Currently, you are still far from becoming a half-step grandmaster, let alone becoming an actual grandmaster. You are, at best, close to the 2-star master standard. The Tier 6 concentration standard is equivalent to only the half-step mental strength grandmaster standard? Shi Feng was startled. Shi Feng had experienced what it was like to have Tier 6 concentration thanks to the light of 2 worlds, and the experience was amazing beyond imagination. With Tier 6 concentration, he could suppress even ordinary Tier 5 existences with his mental oppression. Tier 4 players that weren't at the peak of Tier 4 would even lose consciousness on the spot. In his opinion, this should already be equivalent to the rumored mental strength grandmaster standard. Yet, according to Xia Wuyuan, that wasn't the case at all. If Xia Wuyuan was telling the truth, then Shi Feng couldn't even begin to imagine how powerful a mental strength grandmaster's mind was. Can you not make it sound as if half-step mental strength grandmasters are very weak? I'll have you know that even Yuantian City's upper zone has only 3 half-step grandmasters, while some of the other upper zones have only 2. Our upper zone is considered above average already, Xia Wuyuan said, rolling his eyes at Shi Feng. Also, I managed to assign you this top-tier mansion only because of one other person's recommendation. Otherwise, even with your excellent talent, you'd only get to live in a basic mansion in the middle layer. You'd need first to become a 3-star master to live here. Another person's recommendation. Shi Feng grew curious. Most of his acquaintances in the upper zone lived in the base layer, and he knew none of the big shots living in the middle layer. You know this person. She's the person you've been secretly investigating. Her ID in God's domain is Phoenix Rain, Xia Wuyuan said. If not for this girl's recommendation, you would have received a similar treatment to the other mental strength masters. Phoenix Rain. Shi Feng was surprised. She's also living in the middle layer. What is her current condition? Shi Feng had conducted plenty of investigations into Phoenix Rain. After all, Ji Luorong was very concerned about her elder sister. However, he never managed to find any information. He never thought that he would receive news of Phoenix Rain from Xia Wuyuan. Moreover, it was even Phoenix Rain who had recommended him to the middle layer. I can only say that it isn't good. Apart from that, there is nothing else you should know right now, Xia Wuyuan replied, shaking his head. To be precise, you still don't have the qualifications to know. Her condition isn't good? Shi Feng fell into deep thought. After a moment, he asked, Elder Xia, how do I get the qualifications you speak of? Originally, Shi Feng didn't hold much hope of acquiring information about Phoenix Rain. This was because Phoenix Rain's situation definitely involved a huge secret. He was fortunate to obtain even this slight bit of information. But now that he was a mental strength master, if he could help Phoenix Rain, he would naturally do so. After all, Phoenix Rain had helped him a lot previously. Phoenix Rain's little sister, Ji Luorong, was now an important member of Zero Wing as well. There was no reason not to help. If you make a significant contribution to the Green God Company and elevate your authority to the 3-star high-grade status, you can know a little more, Xia Wuyuan said after giving the matter some thought. Significant contribution? Upon hearing that he had a chance, Shi Feng asked hurriedly, may I know how many contribution points I will need for that? Significant contributions cannot be weighed using contribution points, Xia Wuyuan replied, shaking his head. If you want to make a significant contribution, the only available avenue for you right now is driving off the Outer World's NPC army in God's domain. If you can do that, you might even be able to meet with her. Repel the Outer World NPC army? Shi Feng frowned slightly at Xia Wuyuan's answer. The Outer World's NPC army was different from the Outer World's player army. After all, the player army didn't even have a single Tier 5 player in its ranks. In contrast, the NPC army had Tier 5 NPCs and might even have demigod-level NPCs. Just stopping the NPC army's advance was already a difficult feat. Repelling it was simply impossible for the Eastern Continent's native forces. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, you should stop thinking about this matter and focus on developing your mental strength, Xia Wuyuan said. Although you've become a mental strength master and entered the middle layer, Fu Jiuzhong has already become a 3-star master. If he's really intent on targeting you, you'll probably have to spend the rest of your life cooped up in here. Outside of the middle layer, he'll have plenty of ways to deal with you. Shi Feng nodded in agreement. Currently, the Infinity Master indeed posed a significant threat to him. If Xia Wuyuan hadn't appeared today, Shi Feng definitely would have suffered severe injuries. Moreover, he couldn't stay in the middle layer or upper zone forever, as he needed to manage Zero Wing's affairs in the outside world. Elder Xia, may I know how I can purchase life water? Shi Feng asked. Shi Feng might not be able to leave the upper zone right now, but with Fu Jiuzhong's status and pride, the latter definitely wouldn't stoop so low as to target Zero Wing's other members. After all, none of Zero Wing's other members could pose a threat to him. And if Fu Jiuzhong targeted Zero Wing's other members, the upper zone's other residents would look down upon him. However, Shi Feng couldn't discount the possibility of Fu Jiuzhong having the upper zone's various corporations secretly target Zero Wing either. Hence, the first thing Shi Feng needed to do now was let Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose recover. With their strength, protecting Zero Wing from Fu Jiuzhong's henchmen wouldn't be difficult. Chapter 2909, Soul Improves, Purchase Life Water. Looking at Shi Feng's slightly pale complexion, Xia Wuyuan said in confusion, your current authority is 1-star high grade, so you're allowed to exchange for only 1 bottle per year. However, the main purpose of life water is to replenish life. With a mental strength master's regenerative abilities, you can just use the life potions or the meditation potions exclusive to the middle layer to repair minor physical or mental damages. Are you sure you want to exchange for life water? I can only exchange for 1 bottle per year. Shi Feng frowned slightly at Xia Wuyuan's words. In gentle snow and aqua rose's current condition, they would easily survive for more than a year if they lived in the base layer's large mansion. However, Zero Wing couldn't afford to wait for a year. After all, Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose had many responsibilities they needed to handle. This was especially true for the management of the guild's headquarters in the real world. Fire Dance and Lei Bao couldn't manage the entire headquarters by themselves. Not to mention, Fire Dance and the others would be coming to the upper zone to train soon. There are alternatives available if you wish to exchange for more life water, Xia Qingying said when she saw Shi Feng's disappointed look. Smiling faintly, she continued, as you manage to become a mental strength master before the age of 30, the Green God Company will be giving you a reward. A reward? Shi Feng immediately grew interested. That's right. It is a reward for mental strength masters under the age of 30, Xia Wuyuan said, nodding in agreement. However, I do not recommend you use this reward to exchange for life water. This reward is something even 3-star masters desire greatly, as it can be used to redeem the privilege to enter and train in the core area, which is the top layer of this mountain. This privilege is for 1 month, and it will greatly help in the development of your mental strength. Normally, only after a person becomes a 3-star master would they get an opportunity to exchange for this privilege, and it's for only 10 days. Compared to this privilege, life water is something you can redeem any time. Are you certain you want to exchange for life water? Yes. Shi Feng answered without hesitation. Alright, then. I really don't know what's going through the minds of you young people these days, Xia Wuyuan sighed when he saw Shi Feng's determined expression, evidently dissatisfied with Shi Feng's decision. He then turned to Xia Qingying and said, I still have to report this matter to the higher-ups, so I'll leave the rest of the explanation to you. Xia Qingying nodded obediently in response. After Xia Wuyuan finished speaking, he turned away and left the mansion, having no intention of continuing his conversation with Shi Feng. Shi Feng smiled bitterly at the old man's reaction. Don't mind it too much. Grandpa is just grumpy that you failed to meet his expectations. He doesn't know your circumstances, Xia Qingying consoled Shi Feng after seeing Xia Wuyuan leave. Since you wish to exchange for life water, you need only 2 bottles, correct? I can exchange for 2 bottles. Shi Feng was stunned. Originally, he thought that he could obtain only 1 bottle of life water as his reward and that he would have to spend trade points and contribution points to exchange for the other one. However, based on Xia Qingying's tone, it appeared that he could receive more than just 1 bottle of life water as his reward. This reward allows you to exchange for 3 bottles of life water. If you only need 2 bottles, I recommend you replace the remaining bottle with meditation potions. The meditation potion is more effective than the phantom potion and also functions to repair a person's mental state. Normally, a 1-star master can exchange for only 5 bottles per year. But if you trade in your 3rd bottle of life water, you can get 10 meditation potions. Okay, I'll take the 10 meditation potions, Shi Feng said with a nod, astonished by the reward the Green God Company offered. This reward was hundreds of times better than what he received for clearing the mental path above the age of 20. Shi Feng couldn't help being in awe of the Green God Company's generosity. Now, he realized how valuable the privilege to enter the top layer was. It was no wonder Xia Wuyuan felt disappointed at his decision. Nodding at Shi Feng's reply, Xia Qingying said, you probably can't return to the base layer anytime soon, so I'll pass the life water to those 2 on your behalf. As for the meditation potions, you can exchange for them through the mansion's storage room. I'll have to trouble you with that, General Manager Xia, Shi Feng said gratefully. It's no trouble. This is also within the scope of my duties. You are, after all, a talent I discovered. If you perform well in the middle layer, it'll be of great help to me, Xia Qingying said, waving her hand. Alright, I won't disturb your rest any longer. After saying so, Xia Qingying boarded another maglev limousine and departed the middle layer, leaving Shifeng alone to observe his top-tier mansion. Compared to the base layer's large mansion, this waterfall mansion had a slightly larger footprint. The waterfall alone occupied an area of 2 basketball courts. The water vapor coming from the waterfall was also incredible. Shifeng felt his body becoming refreshed after inhaling only a mouthful of it. The regenerative effects of this water vapor probably nearly rivaled those of the S-rank nutrient fluid without any side effects. This small waterfall was an unlimited supply of weakened S-rank nutrient fluids. If sold to the outside world, it could definitely fetch an astronomical price. Probably no corporation in the outside world would ever dream that something like this waterfall could exist. After all, S-rank nutrient fluids were incomparably precious to the outside world's corporations, with only a very limited amount available each year. In fact, even the corporations operating in the upper zone's base layer would never think of drinking S-rank nutrient fluids like water. After Shifeng finished marveling at the waterfall, he made his way into the mansion. So this is why anyone who has lived in the middle layer before would never wish to leave it again. Realization dawned upon Shifeng as he looked at the hall in front of him. After he entered the mansion and closed the doors, the sound of splashing water cut off completely. The mansion's sound insulation was perfect. In addition, the special energy flowing inside the mansion was twice as strong as outside. If ordinary people lived in such an environment, even if they did nothing but lie on the ground, their physical fitness would still reach the half-step Henglian Grandmaster standard. If they trained their bodies a little, developing their physical fitness to the standard of Henglian Grandmasters would be no trouble at all. Moreover, this special energy also had an effect on a person's mental state, allowing a person to remain mentally energized as well as maintain an ethereal mood. If a person trained in such an environment for a long period, even if they didn't become a mental strength master, they would be close. Shifeng could easily imagine how scary it would be to go from living in such an environment to living in the base layer's environment. The transition would be akin to being a billionaire living a rich and happy life in one moment and then suddenly becoming an ordinary person in the next moment. No ordinary human could possibly accept such a drastic change. It also explained why Fang Shihan was so adamant in preserving her middle layer reserve slot. So long as Fang Shihan could remain in the middle layer, her chances of becoming a mental strength master would be at least double than if she lived in the base layer. Is this the storage room? While touring the mansion, Shifeng noticed a small room made entirely out of some unique metal. When he entered the room and accessed the interface inside, he had to marvel at the Green God Company's financial prowess. According to the introduction displayed, the storage room housed all the resources available for exchange in the middle layer. This storage room even had life water stocked. Through the storage room, he could immediately obtain the potion he wanted. He wouldn't have to spend time on a trip to the Green God Tower during emergencies. This was a great convenience provided to the middle layer's residents. Seeing this, Shifeng decided to give this exchange system a try. The next moment, several laser scanners scanned Shifeng's body and acquired his biometric data. After verifying his identity, the room's interface displayed the resources available to him. Currently, he had 10 meditation potions to his name, each worth 4 million trade points and 100,000 contribution points. 4 million trade points might not be anything to the base layer's corporations, but 100,000 contribution points was an entirely different story. Even the 5 States Corporation would have a heart attack if it had to spend so many contribution points on one item. For the time being, Shifeng chose to redeem only one meditation potion. According to the product introduction, the meditation potion had to be stored in a special environment. And if taken out of storage, it could last for only 1 day in the outside world. After 1 day, the drug would lose its effects. Hence, he should only exchange for the amount he needed. How interesting! When Shifeng spread his mental perception over the dark blue potion in his hand, he actually sensed weak mental fluctuations from it. Normally, he would pick up such mental fluctuations only from living creatures. However, he didn't dwell on the matter, consuming the meditation potion immediately. After all, his mental state was in dire need of it right now. Shi Feng had kept his brain overclocked throughout his fight with Fu Jiuzhong. While he had managed to smile and converse normally with Xia Wuyuan and Xia Qingying earlier, that was possible only because of his powerful willpower. If someone else were in his shoes, they probably would have passed out already. The moment Shi Feng consumed the meditation potion, the scorching heat he felt in his brain instantly cooled. His complexion also rapidly changed from pale white to rosy amazing. This is simply amazing. Shi Feng was dumbfounded when he sensed his mental state. With just one meditation potion, not only did he fully recover from his weakened state, but his mental state had also become surprisingly excellent. He even sensed faint improvements to his mental perception. These changes felt as if he had just consumed a crystal of souls from God's domain. With the meditation potion's effects, I will definitely improve further after consuming 10 bottles. This really makes a person wonder how the Green God Company managed to produce such a miracle drug. If this thing can be mass-produced, it will become possible to mass-produce mental strength masters. Shi Feng was astounded as he looked at the 9 remaining meditation potions he could exchange. After recovering to peak condition, Shi Feng promptly logged back into God's domain. Although he currently didn't have any good ideas on how to repel the Outer World's NPC army, he could share the news of Phoenix Rain's location and condition with Ji Luorong. This would, at least, give Ji Luorong some hope, and the girl wouldn't have to worry about her elder sister's whereabouts every day. Twin Towers Kingdom, Sky Spring City. When Shi Feng entered God's domain again, he was surprised to find that his perception of the world around him had changed slightly. What's going on? Shi Feng was greatly confused as he perceived the world around him. For some reason, his brain's recognition of God's domain was a bit different, and the world of God's domain now felt even more realistic than before. Is it because I used a combat technique in the real world? Shi Feng could sense that his soul was stronger. This, in turn, directly elevated his concentration, which was previously almost Tier 5 advanced rank, to the Tier 5 peak rank. Now, he was only half a step from Tier 6 concentration. However, before Shi Feng could snap out of his daze, he suddenly received a call from Fang Shihan. Guild leader, are you alright? Fang Shihan asked worriedly as she looked at Shi Feng through the video call. I heard you clashed with Fu Jiuzhong. Fu Jiuzhong is now a 3-star mental strength master in Haitian City's upper zone. Even if you're a mental strength master, your body will still be affected significantly after fighting with him. The existence of 3-star mental strength masters was no secret to middle-layer residents. It wasn't difficult for the base layer's top-tier corporations to find out about them either. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, relax. I've made a full recovery already, Shi Feng replied, smiling. He was even tempted to say that should he clash with Fu Jiuzhong again, he definitely wouldn't end up in as miserable a state as before. That's wonderful. Fang Shihan breathed out a sigh of relief. She then said, Guild leader, while you were logged off, the Outer World NPCs started their invasion. Several empires have already clashed with the Outer World NPCs and suffered heavy casualties. According to our estimates, the battle at the Twin Towers Kingdom will begin soon. So far, I've already contacted the various powers based in the Twin Towers Kingdom, Star Moon Kingdom, and several neighboring kingdoms that aren't embroiled in the war for a meeting in Sky Spring City. However, I'm not particularly confident we can get the neighboring kingdoms' player forces to cooperate with us since the superpowers based in the engaged empires are doing their best to recruit them. Alright, I understand, Shi Feng said, nodding. Also, tell them that our meeting venue will be changed to Star Moon City. Change the venue to Star Moon City. Fang Shihan was a little confused. While Zero Wing indeed possessed a guild residence in Star Moon City, the royal capital wasn't one of Zero Wing's main NPC cities. Hence, Zero Wing didn't have much manpower available there. Meanwhile, organizing the meeting this time required a lot of manpower. Not to mention, in terms of quality and quantity, Zero Wing's members in Sky Spring City were far superior to those in Star Moon City. If they held the meeting in Sky Spring City, Zero Wing could better display its current strength and raise the various player forces' confidence in defending the Twin Towers Kingdom. Set it at Star Moon City. Shi Feng said in a determined tone. I understand. I'll notify them right away. Feng Shihan didn't pursue the matter. She then disconnected the call and began contacting the various powers. Meanwhile, Shi Feng promptly teleported to Star Moon City and went straight to the War God's temple there. Previously, the branch temple Lord Howard Ragewind had promised Shi Feng that he would handle all of the necessary procedures for Zero Wing to garrison Star Moon Kingdom. Now that so much time had passed, the branch temple lord should be mostly done. Chapter 29:10, Kingdom's Foundation. When Shi Feng entered the War God's temple's first-floor hall, a level 180, Tier 4 general manager approached him in a respectful manner. Upon seeing this sight, the players looking to pick up quests from the War God's temple turned to Shi Feng with envious and curious gazes. Who is that guy? Why is the general manager personally receiving him? I recall some Tier 4 experts coming to pick up quests some time ago. That general manager didn't bat an eye at them, yet he's actually taking the initiative to welcome a player now. Could that guy be Black Flame? He must be Black Flame. I heard Black Flame always moves alone and loves concealing his identity. Out of all the players operating in Star Moon Kingdom, only Black Flame might get the general manager to treat him with such respect. Shortly after the players in the hall observed Shi Feng's cloaked figure, passionate flames flared up in their eyes. They also began approaching him, hoping to take pictures or videos as mementos of meeting the legendary Sword Saint. After all, Black Flame was a living legend in the current God's domain. He was also the reason many new players had chosen to play the Swordsman class. In no time at all, posts with titles such as Sword Saint Black Flame appears in War God's Temple and Sword Saint Black Flame seen in Star Moon City began appearing on Star Moon Kingdom's official forums one after another. This situation rendered Shi Feng speechless. He had initially used the Nightwalker's cape to conceal his identity. Nevertheless, these cunning players still managed to identify him almost immediately. Lord Sword Saint, the Temple Lord instructed me to give you this should you visit us, the General Manager said respectfully as he proffered a rolled-up parchment. The contract's contents will take effect as soon as you sign it. After receiving the parchment scroll, Shi Feng nodded and said, Please thank the Temple Lord for me. The contract the General Manager handed Shi Feng held the signature of Star Moon Kingdom's ruler. Once Shi Feng signed his name on the contract, Zero Wing would officially garrison Star Moon Kingdom and become its representative guild. At that time, Zero Wing would be able to dictate the kingdom's development and even mobilize the kingdom's army. After reading the contract's contents, Shi Feng signed it without hesitation. The sound of a system notification immediately entered his ears. System, congratulations. Your guild, Zero Wing, has officially garrisoned Star Moon Kingdom and become the kingdom's representative guild. Zero Wing will now enjoy a portion of the kingdom's management rights. At the same time, a system announcement rang throughout Star Moon Kingdom. Star Moon Kingdom Region System Announcement, congratulations to Zero Wing for officially garrisoning Star Moon Kingdom and becoming the kingdom's representative guild. Zero Wing will now enjoy a portion of the kingdom's management rights. The system announcement echoed in the minds of the Star Moon Kingdom's players 3 times, triggering an uproar among the kingdom's players. What's going on? Zero Wing garrisoned the kingdom. Didn't they say that only the reserve guilds of God's domain's 12 great guilds are qualified to garrison a country? The sudden system announcement confused many players. Zero Wing's members, though, were exhilarated, especially the guild's new members. After this announcement, even a fool would understand that Zero Wing now had the final say in everything inside Star Moon Kingdom. Now, even the superpowers wouldn't dare interfere in the kingdom's matters. With this development, Zero Wing's newcomers could not only grind without worry within the kingdom but also gain access to numerous kingdom quests unavailable to other players. These kingdom quests would instantly resolve Zero Wing's concerns of developing its newcomers. Many of Star Moon Kingdom's player forces could already imagine Zero Wing's future rapid development. After all, now that Zero Wing had Star Moon Kingdom as a buffer, the guild could recruit new members without worrying about training resources. It wouldn't have to recruit only Tier 3 elite players and above. While elite players were indeed stronger than ordinary players, they made up only a small portion of God's Domain's player base. And with Zero Wing's current size, the guild might be able to defend its existing territory, but it would face great difficulty if it wanted to expand. However, this development resolved Zero Wing's weakness. Good. I finally did it. Shifeng smiled spontaneously when he saw the system notification. Immediately afterward, he left the War God's Temple and made his way to Star Moon Kingdom's national treasury. Guilds that garrisoned an entire kingdom or empire actually received a massive hidden benefit. Apart from the monthly tribute from the garrisoned country, representative guilds also gained access to the country's national treasury. A country's national treasury housed heirlooms that served as the country's foundation. And while players could exchange for these heirlooms using resources, they had to have the status of a Grand Duke in the country. Although Shifeng didn't have the status of a Grand Duke in Star Moon Kingdom, he had the status of an elder in the War God's Temple. In God's domain, an elder of the War God's Temple sat higher than even the Grand Dukes of empires. Shifeng naturally wouldn't have any problems exchanging for the heirlooms in a kingdom's national treasury. Meanwhile, royal heirlooms were far more valuable than what one could normally obtain through killing powerful monsters. They were items that could change the fate of an entire kingdom or empire. Hence, once a guild became a reserve guild of the 12 great guilds, dethroning it was incredibly difficult. In no time at all, Shifeng arrived at the palace and reached the treasury unhindered. It was no exaggeration to say that the national treasury was the safest location in the entire Star Moon Kingdom. 8 level 180, tier 4 NPCs stood guard at the entrance alone. Moreover, these 8 NPCs were no ordinary NPCs. Although none of them wielded a legendary weapon, they were all clad in fragmented legendary set equipment. In terms of individual strength, these NPCs were more than capable of holding their ground against ordinary tier 5 existences. Apart from these 8 NPCs, there was also a level 200, tier 4 knight captain stationed inside the treasury. The knight captain sported a legendary chest plate, and his combat power had undoubtedly reached the tier 5 threshold. Most importantly, a magic barrier enveloped the entire treasury. If one wished to break through this magic barrier, one would need a force of 3 to 5 tier 5 existences, at the very least. Lord Sword Saint, may I know what business you have here? The knight captain asked respectfully when Shifeng entered the treasury. I'm here to exchange for the items here, Shifeng stated. Please follow me. The knight captain then led Shifeng to the after descending 4 floors and walking for around half an hour, Shifeng arrived in front of a secret room enclosed by a magic barrier. Sitting quietly inside the room was an old man who made Shifeng feel pressured. A tier 5 grand wizard. Shifeng was a little surprised when he saw the old man. Star Moon Kingdom's foundation was far stronger than he expected. After all, apart from being a tier 5 existence, the old man in front of him also wore a legendary hat. Ordinary tier 5 existences who tried to invade the treasury would only get roundly thrashed by this old man. Lord Sword Saint, please enter, the knight captain said while respectfully gesturing for Shifeng to enter the secret room. From the knight captain's actions, Shifeng guessed that the other party could go only as far as the secret room's entrance. After giving the knight captain a nod, Shifeng stepped into the room. Shifeng immediately noticed the room's uniqueness. The environment here resembled the ancient era's environment, which was already rare in the current god's domain. Lord Sword Saint, since you have already signed a contract with His Majesty, according to the contract, you are qualified to exchange for one of the items here, the old man said as he looked at Shifeng. He then waved his hand, summoning 3 items in front of Shifeng. The founding king left behind these 3 items. These items are why our Star Moon Kingdom was able to rise up in the main continent. I hope one of them can be of help to you. When Shifeng saw the 3 items before him, his eyes bulged immediately. This was because Star Moon Kingdom's foundation far exceeded Shifeng's expectations, so much so that he wondered how a kingdom could have such a powerful foundation. The 3 items before him were neither inferior divine artifact ranked items or legendary ranked items. Instead, they were 2 designs and 1 recipe, and any of them could influence even an empire's development. The first to enter Shi Feng's eyes was the design for a mysterious iron flying ship, which was many times stronger than the Crimson Dragon flying ship, an advanced flying ship. Not only was it capable of going up against Tier 4 superior mythic monsters, but its strongest attack even reached the Tier 5 intermediate standard. It could tear through the defensive magic arrays of cities like paper. Moreover, it had a maximum carrying capacity of 300 people. However, it cost a mind-blowing 1.5 million gold coins and 1 million magic crystals to exchange for the mysterious iron flying ship's design. The second item that drew Shi Feng's eyes was the recipe of the Divine Power Potion, a Grandmaster Potion. As the potion's name suggested, players would gain divine power when they consumed the potion. For half an hour, players would have their tier elevated by 1, up to a maximum of Tier 4. Although Shi Feng had heard of potions that raised a player's tier by 1, he had never heard of any that could raise a player's tier to Tier 4. Moreover, the potion even had a long duration of 30 minutes. In the current era where Tier 4 players were still as rare as a phoenix's feather, the recipe for the Divine Power Potion was priceless. Even an ordinary first-rate guild would become an existence feared by the 5 great super guilds should it get its hands on this recipe. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Meanwhile, this recipe cost 1 million gold coins and 1.5 million magic crystals. The last item to enter Shi Feng's eyes was the design for a combat puppet, a secret silver combat puppet. Throughout both his lives, Shi Feng had seen a secret silver combat puppet only once. In God's domain, bronze combat puppets possessed power at the Tier 3 peak standard. Even in the current God's domain, a bronze combat puppet was an incredibly powerful existence. Unless a Tier 4 existence appeared, a bronze combat puppet was unlikely to get destroyed. Above bronze combat puppets were mysterious iron combat puppets, which possessed combat power at the Tier 4 peak standard. They could go toe-to-toe against bona fide Tier 4 players. As for secret silver combat puppets, they possess strength at the Tier 5 basic standard. Tier 4 existences would have a very difficult time destroying a secret silver combat puppet, and normally only Tier 5 existences could damage one. Meanwhile, the design for the secret silver combat puppet cost 2 million gold coins and 1 million magic crystals. Chapter 29:11 Heirlooms secured. Shi Feng hesitated over the Star Moon Kingdom's 3 royal heirlooms. All 3 treasures could help a kingdom rise to prominence and a guild to reach the apex of God's domain instantly. Moreover, each had its advantages. I can exchange for only one. Shi Feng couldn't help asking. Only one, the old man replied with a smile. However, if you manage to help elevate Star Moon Kingdom into an empire, you are free to exchange for all 3. Promotion to an empire? Shi Feng shook his head and smiled bitterly. While he knew of a few ways to get a kingdom promoted into an empire, none of these methods was easy to realize. They all needed a long time to accomplish. After thinking up to this point, Shi Feng suddenly had an idea. He then asked the old man, "What if I offer to swap heirlooms?" Heirlooms could be categorized into royal heirlooms, imperial heirlooms, continental heirlooms, and world heirlooms. In the past, the players that had the fortune to come across an unidentified royal or imperial heirloom would do everything they could to find the fallen country the heirloom used to belong to. Since these heirlooms were treasures left behind by fallen kingdoms and empires, so long as one successfully identified the heirloom, one could use it to re-establish that kingdom or even empire. However, locating kingdoms and empires that had long since disappeared from God's domain wasn't easy. The endeavor rivaled a legendary quest in difficulty. Take Shi Feng for example. Although he had found an imperial heirloom very early into the game, he still hadn't managed to find any clues to the empire the heirloom belonged to. However, this didn't particularly surprise him. After all, at this stage of the game, players had explored less than 20% of God's domain's maps. Indeed. Even now, the players of God's domain had explored barely 15% of the world's maps. In God's domain, human kingdoms and empires occupied only a small portion of the world's territories. Most of the two main continents consisted of level 150 plus neutral maps, and only after 40% of the game's player base reached level 180, tier 3, or above could players adequately explore these maps. Not to mention, this was only the two main continents. There was still the vast ocean in God's domain, which held innumerable islands, some as large as kingdoms and empires. Hence, finding a fallen empire in God's domain was unbelievably difficult. This was why one of the top 10 rookie guilds in the past, which had acquired an unidentified imperial heirloom through an auction, had used this imperial heirloom to exchange for an identified royal heirloom from a kingdom. Afterward, the guild saw explosive growth and quickly became one of the reserve guilds of God's domain's 12 great guilds at the time. Although Shifeng wasn't sure how that guild had conducted the exchange, it would be a huge waste if he didn't ask if he could conduct a similar exchange. Swap heirlooms? The old man was a little stunned by Shifeng's question. After pondering for some time, he said, "That's possible, but are you willing to pay such a huge price?" "What is the price?" Shifeng asked. "Firstly, you need to find an unidentified imperial heirloom. Secondly, you need to pay double the price for a royal heirloom," the old man answered. "Double?" Shifeng was flabbergasted. A royal heirloom was by no means cheap, and all three of the royal heirlooms before him cost upwards of 1 million gold coins and 1 million magic crystals. If this price were doubled, even superpowers couldn't afford them. That's right. However, the most important part is still the imperial heirloom. Without it, it won't matter how many resources you offer, the old man said, nodding. Deal. I'll trade an unidentified imperial heirloom for the mysterious iron flying ship. I'll also use my exchange opportunity for the secret silver combat puppet. Shifeng said, gritting his teeth as he took out the imperial heirloom sitting inside his bag. Before visiting the royal treasury, he had already taken all the funds Zero Wing could spare. However, he only had a total of 5 million gold coins and 3 million magic crystals on him. After all, the recruitment of NPC soldiers and the construction of defensive structures in ancient Rock City cost a lot of money and resources. Although Zero Wing City and Ancient Rock City were raking in a significant income now, it still wasn't enough to cover Ancient Rock City's development costs. You actually have one. The old man was surprised to see the imperial heirloom in Shifeng's hands. Yes, so hurry up with the exchange. Shifeng nodded with an aching heart. All right. That will be 5 million gold coins and 3 million magic crystals in total, the old man said as he extended his hand to Shifeng. Verify the amount, Shifeng said as he transferred the necessary amount of coins and magic crystals to the old man's spatial bag. After verifying that the amount was correct, the old man waved his hand, and 2 ancient designs flew to Shifeng. When Shifeng saw these 2 designs, his heart pounded with excitement. Although purchasing these 2 designs had nearly bankrupted him, their value was immeasurable. Now, all he needed to do was gather the necessary materials and begin mass production. The materials needed are certainly extraordinary. Even the most common of these materials is incredibly rare in the current God's domain. Producing both of these items will also require a ton of Titan gold and magic elven stones. Veins of Titan gold ore were considered grade 2 veins in God's domain and incredibly rare, but they were the only way players could acquire Titan gold ore in large quantities. Other types of grade 2 veins produced Titan gold ore only occasionally. Overall, Titan gold was super rare, and just 1 ingot could sell for over a dozen gold coins. As for the magic elven stone, acquiring it had given Shifeng a headache when he was planning to construct the Crimson Dragon flying ship. However, the Crimson Dragon flying ship's construction cost was nothing compared to the mysterious iron-ranked Blue Thunder flying ship. Even if he excluded the other materials required, just the 5,000 ingots of Titan gold and 600 magic elven stones required would already cost a fortune. As for the secret silver-ranked Flame Beast puppet, its construction required 1,000 ingots of Titan gold and 200 magic elven stones. Both items required magic elven stones in significant quantities to produce. Fortunately, when Yenya and Cleansing Whistle returned from the ancient era, they had brought back plenty of magic elven stones. Currently, Zero Wing had a stockpile of over 4,000 magic elven stones, just barely enough to construct an adequate number of Blue Thunder flying ships and Flame Beast puppets. The only problem now was the Titan gold. Zero Wing only had around 30,000 ingots. While Shifeng was studying the two designs, Fang Shihan suddenly called him. Guild leader. The guild leaders and representatives of the Twin Towers Kingdom and Star Moon Kingdom's various player forces have arrived. However, hardly any guilds from the neighboring kingdoms showed up, Fang Shihan said in frustration. None of the two superpowers came, and only 3 of the 8 first-rate guilds showed up. As for second-rate guilds, they number less than 20. This attendance rate was abysmally low. The guilds that came to help from the several neighboring kingdoms were fewer than the guilds in Star Moon Kingdom. Not to mention, neither of the two superpowers decided to show up. Are they all waiting to jack up the price? Shifeng chuckled. He could understand the two superpowers' refusal. After all, the various superpowers had a lot of territories to cover, and they focused mainly on defending empires. However, there was no excuse for first- and second-rate guilds that weren't involved in the war to withhold their help. The only reason they decided not to show up at Zero Wing's war meeting had to be that they considered this a good opportunity to make a profit. If Zero Wing wished to get their help, then it would have to pay a price. Revealing a bitter smile, Fang Shihan said, the first-rate guilds that aren't attending indeed have such an intention. In return for their full support, they are demanding the rights to purchase private houses and guild residences in Zero Wing City or Ancient Rock City. They say that the other superpowers have already promised them such conditions. However, if we agree to their demands, then they will choose to help our side instead. Shifeng's act of devastating the Outer Worlds player army with a single attack had indeed caused a huge sensation in God's domain. It had also prompted most of the superpowers targeting Zero Wing to abandon their ambitions. Many of the Twin Towers Kingdoms and Star Moon Kingdom's independent experts had even returned to help in the two kingdoms' defense. Most importantly, the number of players seeking to join Zero Wing had also skyrocketed. Unfortunately, all these changes still weren't enough to persuade the unengaged player forces to help Zero Wing. This was because the Outer Worlds NPC army was more formidable than the Outer Worlds player army. There were multiple Tier 5 NPCs in the NPC army, and the upcoming battlefield would span a significant portion of the Twin Towers Kingdom's border. All sorts of siege battles and guerrilla warfare would take place, and there was no way Shifeng could be present for every one of these fights. Moreover, the NPC army on the Twin Towers Kingdom and Star Moon Kingdom's side was significantly weaker than the Outer Worlds NPC army. Because of mythology and Solar Temple's interference, the neighboring kingdoms uninvolved in the war didn't send their armies to reinforce the Twin Towers Kingdom and Star Moon Kingdom but to other kingdoms and empires. Hence, the NPC army defending the Twin Towers Kingdom consisted of the NPCs of only the two kingdoms. Although the Outer Worlds NPC army had split up into several dozen smaller groups and the detachment marching toward the Twin Towers Kingdom didn't have player support, this detachment could still put the two kingdoms' joint army through hell. Hence, a large number of players was needed to fight the Outer Worlds NPCs. And realizing this fact, the neighboring kingdoms' first-rate guilds naturally wouldn't miss the opportunity to get a cut of Zero Wing's resources. Good. Very good. Shifeng smiled when he heard Fang Shihan's words. Tell those first-rate guilds that they can come if they want. But if they don't, then they can forget about coming to us in the future. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. This, Shifeng's reply rendered Fang Shihan momentarily speechless. If she relayed Shifeng's words to those 5 first-rate guilds, it would be no different from severing all ties between Zero Wing and these first-rate guilds. Meanwhile, the War of Worlds wouldn't end in just one day. As both sides continuously grew stronger and more numerous, it would end up a war of attrition between God's domain and the outer world. If Zero Wing rejected the help of these guilds now, it would have much more difficulty finding helpers in the future. After all, battles were taking place all over the eastern continent, and everywhere was lacking in manpower. It was also why the superpowers tolerated the various first- and second-rate guilds' absurd demands. Otherwise, the superpowers would have long since dealt with these large guilds. Shi Feng naturally understood what Fang Shihan was trying to say. He waved the two designs in his hand and smiled, saying, "Look what I have here." Chapter 29:12, Confidence. When Shi Feng took out two old and tattered designs, Fang Shihan initially discounted them. She still thought that his decision was too rash. While the 5 first-rate guilds in question might not have as many peak experts as the various superpowers, they still had over 300,000 Tier 3 players under their command, with some even having 400,000. Such a large force of Tier 3 players could influence the Twin Towers Kingdom's defensive battle significantly. Even the current Zero Wing only had around 1.2 million Tier 3 players, just the average for a superpower. However, after Fang Shihan took a look at the text on the designs, she immediately fell into a daze. "Guild leader, are you playing a trick on me?" Fang Shihan couldn't help asking. She had seen many treasures during her time in mythology. However, no matter how she looked at the designs for the Blue Thunder flying ship and Flame Beast puppet, she still felt as if she was dreaming. At this stage of the game, the 5 great super guilds had already acquired their own flying ships. However, those were only basic flying ships, which were significantly inferior to the Crimson flying ship, let alone the Blue Thunder flying ship. As for combat puppets, as far as she knew, mythology's strongest combat puppets were 3 mysterious iron combat puppets, which were used to safeguard mythology's main headquarters. Mythology had even tasked Tier 4 NPCs to keep a constant watch on these war weapons to prevent theft. "Do you think I need to do that?" Shi Feng chuckled when he saw Fang Shihan's skeptical look. He could understand Fang Shihan's doubts. Mysterious iron flying ships and secret silver combat puppets shouldn't be available to players at this stage of the game, let alone the designs for them. With these designs, so long as Zero Wing had sufficient materials, it could produce a plethora of these war weapons. And with the power of these war weapons, Zero Wing could devastate the entire continent. "Sure. I'll go and reject those guilds now," Fang Shihan said, smiling. A hint of excitement also gleamed in her eyes. Although she had already grown accustomed to holding a powerful identity and position during her time as one of mythology's vice guild leaders, her heart still swelled with excitement and expectations. If Zero Wing could produce the Blue Thunder flying ship and Flame Beast puppet in time, it was almost certain to win the upcoming defensive battle at the Twin Towers Kingdom. Afterward, the 5 first-rate guilds and numerous second-rate guilds peacefully developing in the kingdoms neighboring the Twin Towers Kingdom received Fang Shihan's overbearing response. Fang Shihan did not embellish her message with any redundant words. Instead, her reply contained only one word. "Scram." The 5 first-rate guilds and many second-rate guilds were dumbfounded upon seeing this response. What arrogance! Zero Wing is simply too arrogant. Zero Wing isn't taking our 5 guilds seriously at all. When the guild leaders of the 5 first-rate guilds, who had gathered for a meeting, saw Fang Shihan's reply, they unanimously jumped out of their seats and cursed in anger. Before the War of Worlds began, the superpowers held incredibly powerful influence over God's domain, such that first-rate guilds like theirs could only bear with the injustice and live with their heads down. However, after the Outer Worlds NPC army invaded, the Eastern Continent's superpowers had no choice but to beg the first-rate guilds for help to defend their territories and routes. Yet despite facing imminent danger, Zero Wing actually dared tell their 5 guilds to scram. Zero Wing was simply tired of living. If Zero Wing wants to be arrogant, let it, the guild leader of Holy Seal sneered as he read Fang Shihan's reply. Once the battle at the Twin Towers Kingdom begins, we'll see how Zero Wing continues behaving arrogantly when it lacks manpower. That's right. Since Zero Wing looks down on us, we'll just help other superpowers. Zero Wing will live to regret its decision today, the guild leader of another first-rate guild said, nodding. If Zero Wing asks us for help later on, it won't get such a good price from us again. Many superpowers had already sent representatives to deliver invitations to their 5 first-rate guilds. Among them, Starlink's offer was particularly generous. Their 5 guilds had no need to worry about finding a superpower to employ them for their services. Their 5 first-rate guilds combined could field a massive army of 1.6 6 million Tier 3 players and 64 Tier 4 players. Apart from peak experts and apex experts, the alliance of their 5 guilds was not the slightest bit weaker than the average superpower. This was the basis of their confidence. Once their 5 guilds went to aid Starlink and Starlink's side repelled the Outer Worlds NPC army, Zero Wing would definitely regret rejecting their offer. And once Zero Wing came begging them for help, they would thoroughly bleed the guild for every penny it had. The other 3 guild leaders nodded in agreement, wanting Zero Wing to taste the misery of defending the Twin Towers kingdom without their 5 guilds. Following this, the 5 first-rate guilds collaborated with the uncommitted second-rate guilds and accepted Starlink's invitation to join the Dark Knight Empire's defensive line. This sudden development caught even Lu Tiandi off guard momentarily. "Young master, what do you think is going through Black Flame's mind?" Ikue asked curiously as he looked at the signed contracts he just received. The combined force of these 5 first-rate guilds is by no means weak, and even the super guilds over at the Fire Dragon Empire have eagerly sought their help. With how much these 5 guilds covet Zero Wing City and Ancient Rock City, even if Zero Wing allots only a small portion of those 2 cities' shares to them, these 5 guilds would probably agree to help Zero Wing. Yet, now, Black Flame is just too prideful. He thinks that just because he is a Tier 5 Sword Saint and God's Domain's strongest player, he doesn't need to fear the Outer Worlds NPC army, Lu Tiandi said nonchalantly. He doesn't know just how powerful the NPC army is. Once the real battle begins, even Tier 5 players will be nothing but a joke. If it were before Lu Tiandi had clashed with the Outer Worlds NPC army, he would have considered Shifeng's decision unwise but understandable. After all, Tier 5 players were many times stronger than Tier 4 players. It wouldn't even be surprising to see a Tier 5 player single-handedly destroy a city. However, after experiencing the Dark Knight Empire's defensive battle against the Outer Worlds NPC army, Lu Tiandi now understood that while Tier 5 NPCs were indeed powerful, they weren't invincible. This was especially true in battlefields that involved war weapons and Tier 4 NPCs using battle arrays. Every targeted city in the Dark Knight Empire would face at least 10 battle arrays formed by Tier 4 NPCs and around 500 Tier 4 NPCs. Even if a superpower dispatched all its Tier 4 players, it wouldn't be able to do a thing against such a force. Not to mention, Zero Wing was going to defend an entire kingdom by itself, so there was no way it could afford to concentrate all its Tier 4 players in one battlefield. Moreover, unlike the previous War of Worlds, the Outer Worlds NPC army had many more Tier 5 NPCs in its ranks this time. Just one Tier 5 player couldn't do anything against the Outer Worlds NPC army. A large number of Tier 3 and Tier 4 players was necessary to whittle down the NPC army and achieve victory. Otherwise, the Outer Worlds NPC army would simply trample over the Twin Towers kingdoms, cities and fortresses. But this is good for us. If not for Black Flame's arrogance, these 5 first-rate guilds wouldn't have joined us, Lu Tiandi said, smiling. Starlink wasn't the only superpower defending the Dark Knight Empire. There were also Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul. Only, the 3 guilds were separately defending their respective territories. If Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul failed to defend the NPC cities and fortresses they operated, both guilds would suffer a major setback. After all, both guilds had their headquarters in the Dark Knight Empire. However, while the Eastern Continent's various superpowers were discussing Zero Wing's unwise decision, Zero Wing continued operating as usual. The guild frenziedly recruited God's Domain's newcomers and sequentially developed Zero Wing City and Ancient Rock City. It also relied on the Tier 3 legacies from the Secret Covenant Tower to steadily increase its Tier 3 population. The 5 first-rate guilds' partnership with Starlink did not affect Zero Wing's operations at all. On the contrary, the number of independent experts coming to help defend the Twin Towers kingdom even skyrocketed. This was because after Zero Wing garrisoned Starmoon Kingdom, Starmoon Kingdom's NPC cities established direct teleportation links to Zero Wing's guild cities. This was a great convenience for players seeking to travel to Zero Wing's guild cities. The ability to teleport straight to Ancient Rock City was especially welcomed by players seeking to explore and raid the Orc capital city. Because of the popularity of this new teleportation service, Feng Shihan created a bounty system for Outer World NPCs. Under this bounty system, players would receive 5 points for killing a Tier 3 NPC, 500 points for killing a Tier 4 NPC, and 100,000 points for killing a Tier 5 NPC. Players would also receive ranks according to the points they accumulated. Players that accumulated 100,000 bounty points would receive the bronze rank, which would entitle them to a lifetime discount of 5% on entrance fees and accommodation fees for all of Zero Wings Guild cities. At 1 million points, players would receive the silver rank and enjoy a 10% discount. At 10 million points, players would receive the gold rank and enjoy a 20% discount. After the announcement of this bounty system, over 1 million Tier 3 independent experts and 200 Tier 4 independent experts flooded into the Twin Towers Kingdom's border cities and fortresses from other kingdoms in just one day. All of them sought to accumulate Zero Wings bounty points to reduce their expenditure in Ancient Rock City and Zero Wing City. The various superpowers grew envious over this situation and promptly adopted Zero Wings ranking system. Only, the results weren't as effective. While independent players were flooding the Twin Towers Kingdom, Shifeng gathered the candlelight trading firm's elites and began frantically researching, then manufacturing the Blue Thunder flying ship and Flame Beast puppet. Manufacturing these two war weapons didn't require just precious materials but also high-level forging techniques, alchemy techniques, enchanting techniques, and knowledge of magic arrays. Grandmaster-level lifestyle players had to take charge of the process. The Blue Thunder flying ship, in particular, required the cooperation of 3 Grandmaster forgers. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. In the current God's domain, only the candlelight trading firm could provide such manpower. Even after researching for an entire day, Shifeng and the others only managed to scratch the surface of the design. It would take several more days to construct a Blue Thunder flying ship. On the other hand, to Shifeng's joy, both Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose finally made a full recovery. Apart from losing some of their combat memories and having their combat standards weakened slightly, they experienced no other side effects after taking life water. Moreover, the two of them also succeeded in creating their Tier 5 mana bodies and got promoted to Tier 5. This increased Zero Wings' overall combat power by a large margin. On the 5th day, Shifeng and Candlelight's members were working on the Blue Thunder flying ship. Feng Shihan, who was responsible for the Twin Towers Kingdom's defensive preparations, suddenly contacted Shifeng, guild leader. The Outer Worlds NPC army has started moving.